Hello everyone, my name is Stuart Lamberton and I am the lead officer for Aberdeen City Child Protection Committee. Welcome to this presentation regarding the recent learning review carried out in Aberdeen City. This learning review was referred into the significant learning review subcommittee of the Child Protection Committee and identified some excellent practice in the city. The CPC decided to model the new National Learning Review Guidance published on the 2nd of September 2021 for this case. I'm now going to pass over to Fiona Miel, who was the independent reviewer for this case.
Thank you, Stuart. So yes, I'm Fiona Miel. I'm lead nurse for child protection for NHS Grampian, and I was the lead reviewer for this learning review that we undertook in Aberdeen City. So we'll start by thinking about the overall purpose of a significant learning review. So the purpose of it is to bring together agencies, individuals and families in a collective endeavour to learn from what has happened in order to improve and develop systems and practice in the future and thus better protect children and young people. As Stuart's already said, we decided to undertake a review that looked at an example of really good and excellent practice, and the new guidance for CPCs undertaking learning reviews actively encourages CPCs to consider reviewing cases where there can be learning gained from reviewing good practice. This is of huge benefit in demonstrating firstly the good practice that does exist, acknowledging on it and building on it, and also we hope will go a long way to establishing an ethos of positive learning across our partnerships. And it's fair to say that this is a far cry from previous methodologies that perhaps felt more punitive and investigative. It's rare that we stop to reflect on the positives that exist, and we tend to be far more focused on looking at what could have gone better. And perhaps then we fail to recognise the reality of the learning that we can gain from good and excellent practice. So I'll hand over to Stuart, who's going to take us through the process that we went through.
Thank you, Fiona. So what you have on your screen now is a little flow chart that shows the process that we went through in relation to the new national guidance, which is something we've trialled in Aberdeen before too. So the first one there is obviously the review team and the meetings, and I chaired the review team. We met on 3 occasions over a 2-month period because we wanted to keep that timescale quite tight so that the learning was fresh and current, because in previous cases in other areas across Scotland and including Aberdeen City, sometimes that learning can be a year or 2 years out of date, and we wanted to make sure that we kept this one as current as we possibly could. After the review team was set up, we moved ahead with planning for our practitioner learning event, and this is really the key part of a learning review because it brings staff together to focus on the learning. So this allows practitioners and first line managers in a group and ensures that their voice directly contributes to the review, and it has 2 really distinct purposes. Firstly, it enables them to describe what they did and why, to reflect and analyse assessments and decision making at the time, to identify perhaps what could have been done differently, but also what prevented staff from doing this, and that's in reference to the systems and the processes that we are sometimes confined by and have to work within. It also enables the group to consider and recognise effective practice and what worked well and why, which is what we're doing in this review. Secondly, it generates immediate learning at both individual and group level that can then be taken back into practice, and that's really crucial. If we're going to conduct learning reviews, we need to be able to show what impact these are having, and that impact comes from sharing the learning, putting it out into practice, and making sure the improvements are across the board. The learning review report's then compiled by the independent reviewer, which is Fiona in this case, and that draft initially goes to the review team to look over, amend, update, and then it goes to the significant learning review subcommittee before being approved by the CPC at the final stage. After that, we have the dissemination of learning, which can take various routes, and I'll come on to discuss those at the end of this presentation, but this presentation is one route that we use to be able to disseminate learning across the city. So moving on to the review team now, as I say, they met 3 times in a really short period, and this is a good example of having a proportionate response and allow us to be able to plan things like the practitioner event. As I've covered, Fiona was the independent reviewer and I was the review team chair. And the review team was made up of representation from maternity services, social work services, Police Scotland, and Aberdeen City Council legal services. We obviously began by identifying significant issues from the single agency reports and information that had been requested. That gave us a feel for the case and how we could start to articulate and probe into some of the good practice. And we were also able to challenge each other, to ask clarifying questions and identify further areas we might want to explore. And it was only when we took all the information together from all the services that we saw the bigger picture, if you like. We also agreed to review all our dates and identified the participants to be involved in the practitioner event, which Fiona is going to come on to talk about in a little second. And we briefed them on the process, and the members of the review team also helped those staff and supported them throughout the process. So I'm now going to hand on to Fiona, who's going to talk over the practitioner learning event, give us a little bit of background to the case so you've got a context as to where the learning's coming from, and then Fiona will share some of the learning before I then go on to the suggested improvements and strategies.
Thank you, Stuart. So the learning event was facilitated by myself, as Stuart has already said, and we did hold the event on Microsoft Teams due to the current requirements related to COVID-19 at the time. And there were 15 participants that attended the event from maternity services, NHS Grampian Public Protection Team, social work, Police Scotland Public Protection Unit and Aberdeen City Council Legal Services. The review team chair and also the team administrator were at the event and took copious notes to aid the compilation of the report. Participants that attended the event were asked to reflect on the information that had been shared about Child E and his family, and they were asked to specifically think about decision making at the time and actions that were taken, interactions with other professionals and services. We wanted to really do a focus on areas of effective practice, but also, very importantly, areas where there could have been some improvements. Each participant was given the opportunity to describe their involvement throughout the course of the event. And it was really important that we then got the opportunity to ask clarifying questions. We engaged in discussion and we began to identify key issues and learning points. And I think this is what's really crucial to a practitioner learning event, is that the learning actually happens in real time when everybody is together and starts to share, reflect and explore. We then specifically started to think about what particularly did go well with this case, but also what could have gone better. What strengths can we highlight to share across the wider services as examples of good practice? And as I already said, we started there and then to start identifying learning themes and also, really importantly, ideas for system and process improvement. As you'll know from the learning review guidance, it is important to think about families' views within our the reviews that we undertake. However, in this case, there were particular sensitivities around that, and we were unable, unfortunately, to include mum's views at the time. So I'm going to tell you a little about the context and the background to this situation. So what we have is at the time, at the start of this case, we had an unborn who obviously we have a newborn infant now. We have a very young mother, age of 19. We have a father who was talked about, but we never met. We didn't know really very much about him. Child E does have a sibling, age of 4 years old, and we have a family friend who we knew little about, but was present during the time that this case was happening in Aberdeen City. So the family of this lady was unknown to Aberdeen City Maternity Services prior to her first communication, where she did contact the hospital to say that she was going to have a baby within the next 2 weeks. She said that she had arrived from Slovakia and she had no documentation about her pregnancy. The midwife that she spoke to initially was immediately curious about the lack of information that was being shared, and she was concerned about some of the risks that she'd started to identify even from this very initial conversation. For instance, mum was unable to give her a mobile phone number and was vague about addresses. So the midwife contacted the specialist public protection midwife in NHS Grampian, who promptly then contacted the public protection unit, police and social work. And they very, very quickly worked collaboratively to develop a plan to engage with this lady to ensure her safety and the safety for her unborn. They did a joint visit to the address that was eventually given by this lady, and it quickly was ascertained that she wasn't at that address and never actually had been at that address. So you could see that there were emerging concerns happening. The concerns, that the risks, should I say, that were being considered by police, social work and health were child protection, human trafficking, gender-based violence and adult support and protection. And this information that had been ascertained and gleaned from the information was being shared was shared, like I said, multi-agency, so that there was planning for unborn childie and mum. The specialist midwife did actually receive a call from mum within this very short time period, saying that she had actually gone to Glasgow, but that she still did want to have her baby in Aberdeen, and she felt that her baby was going to be born very, very imminently. She did agree to come back to Aberdeen City because this is where she felt that she had been positively treated, and she felt that she could trust the midwives that she'd spoken to, and she agreed to come back late that night. She arrived in the early hours of the morning, and a plan was put in place to ensure, like I said, her safety. She arrived with an unknown female acquaintance of hers, but we didn't get an awful lot of information about her. She was able to give us an address in Glasgow, and that allowed further investigation from police and social work that eventually led to our understanding that there had actually been a pre-birth case conference for this unborn baby in England, and it was thought that this baby was at risk of sexual abuse. These escalating risks and led to the planning for a child protection order, which was put in place very, very quickly after this baby was born, and the baby was born in the early hours of the following morning safely. So police and social work did speak to mum regarding the information that had come to us, but she stuck by her initial information that she had shared with us and denied that there were any false information that she had given us. As soon as the baby was born, the child protection order was sought, and our baby was actually put in the neonatal unit as a place of safety. Despite lots of input by the midwives and our social work colleagues, mum actually did discharge herself before the time that we would have wanted, as she'd undertaken a cesarean section, but our midwife, a specialist midwife, did actually keep in contact with her as she returned to England. So we'll go on now to think about some of the practice and organisational learning that has come from this case. So what we have realised is that some families will go to extreme lengths to evade processes that have been put in place to keep a child or young person safe from harm. And in this situation, this lady was fully aware that a plan had been put in place that meant she would not have the care of her newborn baby. Her other child had already been removed from her care. She had a 4-year-old child that had been removed from her care. And so she made a decision to travel to another country in the UK so that she could attempt to evade the plan that had been put in place. Now, whether this was a conscious decision on her part to portray herself as a victim of human trafficking is not known. However, This is how the case first presented. And although there are national systems for missing person alerts, we weren't aware of this lady being a missing person at the stage when she arrived in Aberdeen City. The next practice in organisational learning was that assessment and planning is meaningful and effective when multi-agency partners approach this from a shared perspective, each agency contributing to the plan to keep the child and family safe. So the particular challenge of this case was in its immediate and time-dependent presentation. The scope of this review lays out the timescale of 5 days from initial contact, when there was no prior or background information of this family, to the securing of a child protection order. The imminent birth of this baby required agencies to act in a swift and efficient manner to gather, share and analyse the information in a timely way. And this requires particular strengths of good working relationships and systems that make communication easy and accessible. The plan for this baby, along with contingencies, involved a high degree of collaborative working with our multi-agency partners. We also came to the conclusion that systems work effectively and efficiently when there is accurate and relevant sharing of information. So the process for preparation of the child protection order commenced when concerns began to escalate prior to this baby's birth. So our social work colleagues liaised with legal services to ensure that a child protection order was in place in a timely way to ensure that this baby was safe from harm. Information sharing between maternity services, social work, police and legal services ensured that the constantly and fast evolving flow of information was shared across the team around the child. And the maternity badgernet system ensured that information was recorded accurately and contemporaneously, with essential alerts for all staff to be informed of current risks. And lastly, we concluded from this case that in Aberdeen City, we do show compassion, care and respect towards our clients and our workforce, demonstrating a trauma-informed approach to practice. So the challenge of working with clients who aren't being truthful is that we can sometimes adopt a view of them as manipulative or deceitful. But a workforce that is trauma-informed will recognise that these behaviours can stem from the impact of trauma and adversity, and are able to respond in ways that prevent further harm and support recovery. There was little opportunity to gather the background of this lady's life experiences, but we do know that she became a mother at the age of 15 years of age, and that she had experienced the removal of that child from her care and now faced the trauma of the removal of her second baby from birth. But at all times, staff recognised and responded to this distress of this experience. We think about the effective practice. First and foremost, we want to think about the professional curiosity that the midwife demonstrated right from the very initial conversation. Within a few minutes of this lady presenting, she realised that there was something that she needed to do, and she called the support of her multi-agency colleagues. The co-location of social work team in Aberdeen City is absolutely something that we find as a huge strength, and it allows an ease of communication between the maternity staff and social work. And this extends to an open door policy where maternity staff are encouraged to share any practice concerns that they have around their clients, and that there is a regular drop-in session that allows them to take their concerns to the team. This allows professional learning, support and guidance regarding any concerns that are being held, regardless of a perceived threshold for social work referrals. And this reflects an early intervention approach to prevent and minimise harm to a child. NHS Grampian Public Protection Team allowed a high level of analysis of potential risks that allowed that information sharing with our multi-agency colleagues once the lady had arrived at Aberdeen Maternity Hospital. Our accurate and timely sharing of information from social work to legal services allowed that draft child protection order to be escalated and prepared prior to the baby's birth. And the solicitor who applied for that order described the level of communication as excellent, and this enabled him to submit a comprehensive statement for the order when it was required. This was particularly important as it was a fast and ever-changing flow of information that required to be communicated for the application to be accurately updated. And also what we realised as well is that our multi-agency relationships have to be based in respect and trust. And there was a real sense of everybody having a sense of feeling that we were all in this together, and it demonstrated a high level of professional and mutual respect. I want to say that while the circumstances of this case are unusual, it is reflective of everyday practice and demonstrates the good working relationships that we do have across Aberdeen City. So I'm going to hand over now to Stuart to talk about our suggested strategies for improving practice and systems across Aberdeen City.
Thank you, Fiona. I really just want to touch on the point there around trauma-informed practice, and this case really highlighted across all the agencies involved the real strength-based approach that we adopt in Aberdeen City, and it really came through as a shining light, I think, in this case, and that was widely recognised by everyone involved. So there's been a really clear demonstration of trauma-informed practice, like I say, within this case, and the sharing of this learning review will further highlight that message, across Aberdeen City. One of the key things that was highlighted as well was the open door policy employed by Social Work in Aberdeen Maternity Hospital, with a regular drop-in session which allows for early information sharing to ensure a preventative and early intervention approach for addressing risk for unborn babies and babies. This model is something that midwifery staff highly value and find supportive in their learning practice. The maternity badger net system is another area that was highlighted, and that's obviously across Scotland, and that alerts all maternity staff to risks identified for clients and babies across Scotland. However, this case did highlight the issues of systems that are possibly not UK-wide and cross-border or cross-country. So from a local perspective, it would be beneficial for the Aberdeen Maternity Hospital social work staff to be able to access that system to further enhance the information sharing systems that we work with. This is something that's obviously beyond the CPC's remit too, and this is something that the CPC are actively trying to address with colleagues and partners. Finally, the issue of missing family alerts to ensure timely information sharing of vulnerable missing persons, requires further focus, and this is currently being developed in Aberdeen City. We obviously have our missing person protocol, which is posted on our Aberdeen Protects website, and our position regarding other UK country systems and processes is something that would require a national response, and this will be highlighted through the Child Protection Committee up to Child Protection Committee Scotland in collaboration with the Scottish Government, and that'll be fed directly by myself and Fiona through what's called the Knowledge Hub. We'll be able to raise these issues at a national level and hopefully push forward the responses. So we want to conclude this presentation by thanking everyone involved in the review, right from the staff at the Practitioner Learning Event, the review team, Fiona as the reviewer, and everyone, Team Around the Child, and everyone connected with the CPC and the Significant Learning Review Subcommittee. We also want to highlight that there's a 7-minute briefing about this review which accompanies this presentation, and that can be found and accessed via the link below. And also want to highlight that the final and full report into this review is also published below, so you can take a read through that whenever you get time. Thank you very much for listening, and again, thank you very much for your time.